Chapter 9 discusses the general approach of making incremental flow improvements and presents some specific techniques for making such improvements. However, not all improvements require a formal technique, and many are made primarily by using intuition and common sense. The first video explains how to conduct small experiments, which could be actually trying out an improvement, or it could be a thought experiment. The idea is to involve everyone in making small improvements, and the people who do the work are in the best position to make those kinds of suggestions. The remaining 5 videos cover 5 different types of techniques for making flow improvements that are commonly seen in lean organizations. Each of these videos provides examples of how these improvements were made in a variety of processes and organizations. So the purpose of this practice is to experiment. So it's like a trial and error approach. It's not a, let's go hire some engineers and go spend 3 months coming up with some great answers. So it's a trial and error approach, experimenting with different ways of reducing the waste that has been recognized. So this is where you're going to connect back with where you're recognizing the waste, and that's why understanding waste and being able to express the problem in a certain way is important. Whatever improvements come out of this process that look good, they're positive, they're accepted by management, they're not just done willy-nilly, they're accepted by management and then standardized in the form of the standard work, which you've already been there. That was the process breakdown sheet, or whatever form in which you want to capture your standard work. If you develop a new IT system, that development work, that's not everyday work, that's something different. You don't usually management to develop an IT system. But as soon as it's implemented, what happens? Everybody's got to start using it as part of everyday work. And as any of you who have been through conversions know, new systems tend to change how we do things. And so lean management is perfectly suited to that, to again, here comes the new system, you get it in place, and then you get it better and better and better. So that's the idea of this improved work practice. Now, so this is what really goes on, and it's a little bit of a fuzzy thing, but it's a common sense thing. So you're really doing experiments when you're improving work. You've observed some waste signals or some problem symptoms, let's say. You're speculating on the root causes, like why is this waste happening? And in real situations, you often don't know. There could be multiple reasons for it. But what you do is you go through kind of a cycle of imagine a better way. Well, let me think about what would be a better way of handling the situation. You either what if it or try it. So to what if it means you just say, well, what if I did this? It's like a thought experiment. It's not actually running out and doing it. But you can also actually run out and do it depending on what it is. So it's kind of either trying it in your mind or trying it in the real world, and then see what happens. Now, if you're doing it in your mind, you can evaluate it and say, okay, if I did that, what do I think would happen? Maybe you ask other people, hey, Harry, what do you think if we did this? What do you think would happen? Or you actually try it and see, hey, George, can you try this out? Let's see what happens. Obviously not something that's going to throw a wrench in your whole operation, but that's why you're doing these, a little bit at a time. And based on what you learn, you might say, well, it's pretty good, but we should change this way of doing it. So you come back, let's think of a different way. And you're kind of going through this brainstorming and learning by trying circle here, okay? All the while you're keeping your process customer needs in mind. Remember, that's what you're focused on. And you want to try to get other people involved in this brainstorming and trying and evaluating, right? At first it can be just you, but try to get more people involved. That's the whole partnering idea, again, applied to improvement. So the skill of improving procedures, there's certain things that you can learn how to improve, basically the steps. So what you're seeing here, this was a study done by McKinsey & Company, probably on Southwest Airlines. They're trying to disguise it. But what they're looking at is, I think it's about 9 steps involved in turning around a flight at the gate, right? So, you know, when been on these flights, they come in, they're not there very long, and they turn around and go out, and it actually makes a big difference. Even a couple of minutes can allow them to crank, you know, more flights in the same day. So it's very, very important for airlines that are on these kinds of schedules. So here you can see, and here's a process metric. So here's the process, you know, turning around the flight. The total cycle time was 52 minutes and 18 seconds. And through these step improvements, they got it down to 33 minutes. They've saved almost 20 minutes, and that's huge. So let's just look quickly at some of the things they've done. You can see the savings here, the reductions. So over 8 minutes of time was saved in this step, waiting for transmission to gate of cabin crew's approval to board and waiting for the first passenger. The solution, the technique they applied was basically just visual signals. I mean, basically, instead of the paperwork being passed out along the gate and walked over, you know, the darn pilot looks out the window and waves. You know, it's something as simple as that. But look at, you know, they've saved 8 minutes on average. Other things, just standardizing how they clean the airplane, setting up kits, that's arranged kits as part of this idea of improving procedures. And notice here, even though they're only saving 6 seconds, it's still important. You know, this sort of reminds me of the pit crew that we saw in the you know, the pit stop. So cleaning crew in position ahead of time, so they're ready to go, and they can save 6 seconds. But you know, of course, the big savings occurred elsewhere. So, so this idea, some of the things that I've taken note of in talking with you all, like Gabe. Well, last time it was with Carlos, the idea of giving an ABC prioritization. Okay, so that's an idea of how to improve a step of, don't just treat everything that goes through the step in the same way. You may treat A cases differently than B and C cases. And that generally ABC idea applies to a lot of situations. Okay, so that's the idea of improving step. The other process idea is the idea of moving or deleting steps. Now, and this is where, in order to understand this is where you get into a little bit of process mapping. This is not so difficult. You can basically take your process steps and kind of lay them out in a typical timeline. But it does start getting more involved. You have to make certain decisions on how to make this work. But the basic idea is you look at the sequence of steps, how long it's taking, and then, for example, maybe move some steps, say earlier in the process. So one of the common things, and I think Gabe, I think you talked about this, about some of your slower responding clients that you wanted to get them out, right? So you made the request early. So that's common. If there's a long lead time with something, get it started as early as possible. Okay. Another good reason to move something forward earlier in the process is especially if it's like a filter. Okay. So what I mean by that is we had one of the companies we worked with in the class, in my MBA class, was a large telecom company, and they were having to recruit like 500 new agents within 6 months. So it was a big deal of recruiting agents. And it took them like, you know, all these different steps, and they'd go through, you know, spend hours and hours and weeks getting to it. And then they would do the drug test at the end. Okay. And they were finding 40% of them were failing the drug test. They're going, oh, this is not good. So simple thing, let's move the drug test to the beginning. So that way, you know, 40% of them drop out in the front, and you don't have to go through all those steps just to figure out they're going to fail a drug test. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that can repeat in other situations too. Whenever there's a filtering kind of step, you always want to think about moving that earlier. Sometimes it involves doing things in parallel. Like I know Mercedes is on her way back, but you know, the idea of maybe some of the things she can do right now she does in sequence, maybe do more things in parallel, that if you can do it, that can reduce the total cycle time. And of course, deleting a step is a no-brainer if you can find something that's duplicated, redundant, whatever. Okay. All right, now here's the first of the three general flow improvements, layout changes. And this is the skill is designing physical layout. So you've already done that in a certain sense with 5S organizing, because there was some layout involved, maybe, you know, kind of how things are laid out in a physical space. But some of the common layout solutions for lean, you have this idea of a work cell, where you'll often see people that are all lined up in a row. It could be in an office. Gabe, you got your bullpen. Matt, I don't know how they're arranged in your, you know, all your PAs doing the data entry work, but a lot of times, instead of lining them up in a line, you make them in this little U shape, and there's just a lot of benefits to it. There's a lot of ability to communicate, less walking if they have to get with each other. You know, it's not always the case, but this is always something to think about, the idea of a work cell. Does that ever make sense? Here's another McKinsey example. It's kind of like a work cell idea where they studied a restaurant, and where they're basically preparing sandwiches, a breakfast sandwich, lunch sandwich. Here before you see the different stations. This was where they're preparing it. And each of these numbers is a step. So, I mean, they physically had to start at the register, go to the prep station, do the bread, go to the toaster, blah, blah, blah. So you can see there was 13 physical movements. And we actually call this a spaghetti chart. That's one of the things you can do in layout analysis. And so clearly waste of effort, right? That just seems like too much. Well, look what they were able to do just by reorganizing the layout. They created this cockpit prep station. They, you know, kind of reorganized some things. Now they can do the same, accomplish the same result, meet the customer need in 5 movements rather than 13. And what it did, it saved them about a minute per sandwich. And again, might not seem like a lot, but it is a lot. You know, it ends up adding up. Then you have bottlenecks. Okay, bottlenecks are everywhere. Gabe, you had a bottleneck when you had that one assistant that came in crying, right? That was so overloaded. I mean, obviously it was a bottleneck because she looked like this character here, probably. You know, everybody's on her case. And so the idea of a bottleneck is like what you know, we've all experienced when you're on the highway, where you're driving along, and then there's a restriction in capacity. There's you know, the lanes come down, or there's an accident or whatever. And what happens? Well, you always get a backup, right? Things back up behind the bottleneck. So whenever you have a person, or it could be a resource too, maybe a coffee machine or something, but typically a person who's just overloaded compared to the other people, you get bottlenecks. And it's a skill to begin to recognize them and manage them. And the way you manage it is you basically go to that resource and you either increase the capacity of the resource or you reduce the load. Like Gabe, what you did, you reduced the load. You said, look, you don't have to do this. I'm going to make your life easier. You can, you know. So what you really want to try to do here is you want to workload balance. So you want to have, as much as possible, all of the people who are doing this work roughly the same utilization, not super overworked, but not super underworked. Anytime one is way overutilized, that's going to be a bottleneck. Okay. So there's a lot behind this. There's a lot of technical things that can be done, time studies, but sometimes it's just common sense. And when you eliminate a bottleneck, obviously you have all this weighting that can be reduced, a lot more productivity, less stress, and actually it's more flexible because, you know, when you have a good balance among all your people, you're not so dependent on one. And if something unusual happens, people are ready to adjust, you know, as opposed to when there's a bottleneck, you're just not ready to handle even more difficult situations. So, and then the last one is the idea of batch size, and the skill is managing batches. Now, this is the one that might seem a little counterintuitive, but it's important, and I want to throw it out there. At least start thinking about it. This involves reducing the planned or typical batch size for a process. So what would be a batch? Well, one of the common ones is paying bills. And so Gabe, for example, you guys, I know when you pay your, I guess Carlos every Friday does a whole batch, right, of payments. And that's fine, but it's very common. It's kind of a common human tendency to want to batch things. We like to just, we think it's efficient. Let's get all the bills together and let's just do it once a week. Actually, at Trend in our business, we started out once a month, but then we realized, hey, this is not working well because we can't always take early payment discounts. And, so we went to every 2 weeks, and then we went to every week. And so the idea is you start doing things in smaller batches. And it does require you to set up more quickly. So you have to be able to, so for example, Gabe, if for some, if you guys feel like, let's try twice a week check writing. Well, now Carlos has got to be ready to kind of get set up and get all the files out, and, but it's something to think about. Believe me, and maybe this one's a little more down the road, but it's one of the ones I wanted you to be aware of as a common lean flow improvement.
I'm curious, I'm trying to visualize what the advantage is of doing small batches, like paying 1/5 as many bills once per day instead of all on Friday.
Right. So a couple things. One is, one of the things in our business was early payment discounts. So if you paid if the bill came in and you paid it within 10 days, you got, say, 2% off. Okay. But that requires you to be able to pay it on that 10th day. So if you're only paying every 2 weeks, sometimes you miss it. Bill came in, we're not going to pay for 2 weeks. We missed those early payment discounts. So you basically get the first unit of work out earlier. Another big thing is, if there's something going wrong, you don't want to repeat that error 1,000 times if you have a batch of 1,000. Okay, that's one of the big ones. So big batches tend to hide problems and errors, and you don't discover them until it's too late. I mean, a classic example is when you have to, and I used to do this in class, we had an exercise where you kind of create documents. And so let's say you're going to make 100 copies of something, right? And you just put in 100 to the machine and let her go. And you go pick up your 100 copies and you go, oh man, this is the wrong page. So, so instead of trashing 100 copies, if you just done 5 or something, you would have detected the problem earlier. So that's what it is. The flip side is, of course, you have to set up more often. You have to, so if you're not going to run all 100 copies, you got to first run 5 and then maybe run 20 and then run. So now you've done it 3 times. So it's not a slam dunk. I mean, you're not going to go, let's just do 1 copy at a time. But I can tell you from experience, most people are biased towards too big a batch. And you just don't think about it because it's not intuitive to say, let's do smaller batches. But it's something, like I say, I did want you to be aware of.
Yeah, the reason it's not intuitive to me to do smaller batches is I don't want to have to switch gears that often.
That's it. It's the setup.
But if your setup is real, like seamless and flows, then it doesn't feel like
exactly. That's what, like in manufacturing, it's called a single minute exchange of die. So to switch a machine from one to the other in old manufacturing can take 2 days, and they want to make this work. You want to be able to switch the die within a minute. It's called single minute exchange of die. But of course, in say paying the bills, it'd be, how long does it take for you to get all the files out?